I had some ideas about something, but they're all gone.
Mm.
So I have nothing to say. I hope you enjoyed this session.
This is a great episode.
This is one of our best. People would enjoy that.
Yeah.
I hate to do this in a way because I don't want to jump on a bandwagon, but today is the 21st of May.
Mm.
A few days ago, on Sunday evening, the ninth season and final season of the Game of Thrones culminated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to address something in that and then apply it, if I can, to the nature of our politics and to the nature of things we've mentioned before, like tribalism. You could even bring that in.
Mm.
But anyway.
Spoilers. Spoiler alert for anyone listening.
Yeah, for anybody who's not seen the ending, too bad. But then nobody watches these anyway, except several of my old friends, my old friends.
You never know if we put Thrones in the title.
Yeah.
That's a
I suppose so. One more fool making comments.
Yeah.
What I found, just in general, lots of people are very disappointed in the last 2 episodes.
Yeah.
In fact, the last 3, the fight against the White Walkers, and it had flaws in it that people found naturally. Of course, anybody who watches it, any piece of art's going to find flaws. And then, of course, when the most sympathetic character in the whole volume, for 9 years, the most sympathetic character, this beautiful little sweet-natured, fragile, platinum blonde who possesses magical powers. He controls red dragons and is totally unburnt in fire. She being the most sympathetic character in all of this, she comes to her demise. And I think a lot of people probably disappointed in that. But I think what the author did was to show something that's real, okay? She, for a very long time, was defeating evil people. Evil, it's even said that way. Wherever she goes, evil men die.
Mm-hmm.
And they die terribly. And nobody is angry about it because it's only retribution since they were so terrible. And they died the way they made their own victims die. So she's the good. And she believes herself more and more and more to be the expression of good, that she can save the world and she can break the wheel that crushes. The wheel, by the way, looks like the swastika.
Yeah.
Okay? And it crushes everybody. And she thinks she can break that wheel by tearing down the oppressors and tearing down the masses. And yet she's going to do exactly what they did. She just killed nearly 1 million people, burned them to death for no reason except that she was angry with the queen, who used them as pawns.
Mm-hmm.
There's no ration. Now suddenly she's seen as the mad queen, because that's a form of madness.
Right.
Okay, that level of vengeance. And then she said something to her great lover that all the other people do not get a chance to choose. She's the one who's going to choose.
Right.
So here you have the development of ego, and it's done very well in a sense. It's primitively done, but there's the expression. You can play the role and idealize yourself. She perfectly well did. Idealized herself as the expression of good, and she didn't count on the fact that there is a shadow. And so if I can leap from there to politics, something that I've talked about in your presence, just because you see the bad in others, just because you see the flaws in another political system, doesn't mean that your own political system will be unflawed. And the reason for that is simple. It's because ego exists at the heart of all political systems. And by its nature, ego is going to be self-interested to the point of pathology, okay? So it doesn't matter what political system you establish. You can establish a great social revolution. You can tear down the Chinese can tear down the centuries of oppression held by the great masters who controlled everybody, tear them down, get rid of them. And what happens? The vacuum is filled with a system whose intent is to make everybody equal and to share. But because it's run by people, it becomes every bit as monstrous as anything that came before. Thus the Chinese will say, the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know. Because they understood about that. Albert Camus, the Rebel, talks about that, how every revolution creates a vacuum of power, and then who comes into the vacuum of power is going to be just essentially the same. It doesn't matter if it's under the banner of a democracy or under the banner of an outwards dictator. The masters will rule. And you can see the trappings of the masters all the time. I mean, you look in terms, I shouldn't be saying this, maybe they want to kill me for saying it, but anybody who doesn't know this about our government, power corrupts people, and power also attracts great wealth and great other benefits. So, you know, you have some of these gentlemen going on junkets and really enjoying themselves in every carnal way and getting great compensation for it, including money now, properties, and also promises of higher positions later on in many cases. It's just the way it is. It's the way it operates all the time. If you're a high-ranking general in the Pentagon, when you decide to retire, you're going to still get paid a great deal because people are going to want you on the board. Even if you don't do anything, they just want your name on the board so that you get paid. It's just the way politics runs. But the point I'm making is that this is the nature of ego existence. And what's sad, in my opinion, but this is also the way of our world, there's no attempt at remedying the problem. There's an attempt at always covering it over with some kind of glossy paint and calling it by another name, another rubric, another political party, another financial attempt or economic attempt. It's simply always a secondary, at best, secondary solution that's sought. And so you're never dealing with the essential earthquake that's taking place beneath all that. Everything is going to crack apart. And you see it again and again, and tell me I'm wrong. Anybody who's studied any history knows this. Every regime collapses. And most regimes outwardly become much more like the oppressors that they overthrew.
Right.
I mean, do we have to refer to Stalin? According to what I had always read, and according to Jordan Peterson, 45 million people killed. Many of his own. I know he starved the Ukraine one year because they weren't with him. So he cut off all the food supply and the heating supply in the winter. How many did he kill? 3 million, I think it was the number that I heard or read. And then, of course, Mao Zedong, I mean, Peterson talks about like almost 100 million people under him. The Chinese had so many people, and he just made sure that there was a slaughter. There was a slaughterhouse in China for a long time. And you don't have to go to Pol Pot. 7 million people, he killed 3 million of them, terribly. Pulled them out of the cities. These are guys who were either so evil or so stupid, simple-minded, essentially, in their philosophy. The reason that people are alienated from one another and the power exists in the way it does is because of industrialization. So according to him, and so what he did was to pull everybody out of the cities. He emptied all the cities and pulled the people into the jungles to make them work as farmers. And he tortured many of them to death. And he killed 3 million of his own people in the name of what? Liberating his people. Take a look at that. And so those people who are unhappy with the demise of the beautiful little platinum blonde, I thought she was beautiful as a little platinum blonde, and she played her role very well. you see her in person, she's kind of a goofy little thing, but she's an excellent actor, and she played her role, I think, extremely well. And I think it was an honest ending, and except that Forrest Starks wound up in a very sanguine position. I mean, the guy who killed her was not burned alive. Well, he couldn't burn anyway.
Right.
And then secondly, was not beheaded immediately by the ever scowling Grey Worm.
Right.
I love that.
Right.
and oh jeez, and everybody wound up okay. It's a funny ending, but I really can see it was done, and they did produce some beautiful pieces of art in there. The best, in my opinion, the very signature of the whole thing was when Daenerys was going to walk out in front of her troops and speak. She was coming from behind the wall, and the dragon, it was so beautifully done. The dragon wings just seemed to flow right out of her.
Yeah.
For a brief moment, she looked like the dragon. It was such a beautiful piece.
She's the Antichrist, and it was the apocalypse.
You could say it all that, but basically it's just a continuation of the odyssey of human ego.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I personally was fine with the way that they ended it. I think it was very honest.
Yeah, sure. I like that too.
There's no happy ending coming. She said right at the end that it was just going to be endless war.
Right.
To cleanse the planet.
Cleanse the whole world.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, that is a psychotic characteristic. There were people like that in the Nazi army who wanted the war to go on forever.
And they were flying those colors, her banner, black and red.
Yeah, well,
It was interesting the way that they did the whole thing.
I think the guy's pretty smart. If he's smart enough to get 9 years squeezed out of HBO, that's quite an accomplishment.
Right.
That's the biggest production I've ever seen. They must have spent at least $1 billion on that production.
Right.
All over the world, all kinds of people.
Right.
55 nights to shoot the Great War with the Walking Dead there. Amazing stuff. Ambitious. I always thought that Rome was the best thing I'd ever seen. Before that, you had Deadwood. But then when Rome came, I saw, that's superior.
I heard Rome and Vikings. I heard good things about Vikings as well.
I guess I've never seen it.
And with John, I mean, his entire story seemed to circle back around, to going back up north and just being cast out into the free land.
The funny thing is, the Night Watch was dedicated to what? Holding out the wildlings.
Right.
Actually, they're going back
right.
on their own, and the Walking Dead are dead. So there's no need for the Night Watch, and he's not, right? They're going back into that funny forest in which I think the very first episode contained the guy who ran away from the Night Walkers, and he was beheaded by Ned. He was a ranger. He used to go out in there, and I guess he came across. He found the Night Walkers still alive.
Yeah.
And that means that's the beginning of this incredible journey. That was quite a story.
Right.
And I watch it from a point of view of production. I want to be a snob, okay? I'm not going to just get caught up in the story and root, even though you can feel yourself doing that, because you can identify. If an actor is good, he or she can actually become that person for a little while. I know this enough about actors. And in that sense, they can learn things about themselves. It doesn't have to be a false enterprise, as Gurdjieff said. No. You can, if you're a sweetheart like Amanda Clark, she's a little cute, sweet thing, but she plays this demon at the end. Because she looks the same, but she's a demon. She's so self-centered that she thinks that she represents the good. Now that's psychosis.
Yeah, go into pathology. Go into that.
That's a pathology. People are not going to like me to say this because there are lots of people. If they heard this, if millions and millions of people heard me say this, that many of them would say he's full of crap. I am good. Just put everybody in a certain set of conditions and you see how good you are.
Right.
Again, I mentioned this probably last time. I mentioned Churchill when he was leading Britain against the Nazis and I think it was, I told you, Turing, the genius, mathematical genius, figured out the German code and they broke it. And so they knew what the Germans were doing. They got all their communications and they were reading all their messages back and forth. And then one night they found out that Coventry was going to be bombed. It's a smallish city. And Churchill had to decide whether to send up the RAF, the Royal Air Force, to attack them as they came in and stop them, because the Royal Air Force was pretty good at that kind of thing. They could have stopped them, but if they did, then the Germans would know they cracked the code. Absolutely, they'd know. And therefore they change the code and they'd start all over again. They won't know what else is coming for the big stuff. Coventry, you're not big enough. You're not too big to fail. Sorry about that. So he let it happen. And I told you, right? How many dead? 8,000 dead. 8,000 of his own people. And that's where when I was teaching ethics and I was teaching psych, I would point out to the kids, you can try to live your life according to a categorical imperative where you think you will never do anything wrong, you can never do anything you don't want everybody else to do, but just be put in a position of power, of authority, where you have to make decisions that influence human behavior. By its nature, ego is never going to be up to the task to be for all things and all people. It can't be. Because it means self-centeredness. It means ultimately oneself. And so if you become like, I'm going to pick on the nuns for a moment. How many of the nuns became nuns because they wanted to be brides of Christ? They wanted to be purely good beings. And then you find them in the positions of power. And they're so nasty. Lots of people hated the nuns.
You had a good experience with nuns?
No, I was fine. No, Michael's the story, a good friend of mine. Well, he was brought up by a mother who apparently disapproved of a great deal of his behavior. It's to the point even where she threw something big and heavy at him. So he had a very jaundiced point of view towards women in authority anyway. And then they sent him to a Catholic school. And I changed the names because I don't remember the names. But there's a scene that I said looked like Sister Mary Immaculata chasing him down the corridor with a hatchet in her hand. Because he was just such a little, the Italian word is fivend, a little offender, a little pain in the ass in class, and he wouldn't shut up. Mr. So-and-so, Mr. Michael, can you say nothing? Nothing. And then she's chasing him. Well, obviously she doesn't have a hatchet, but she wanted to kill him, and therefore conditions. Just you want to find out how good you really are, go teach kids.
Right.
There's an education. I can personally say this, and if any of my former students are watching, the relationship between the one who wants to teach and the one who's is learning is almost seamless. It should be seamless. You absolutely are doing it for them, but you know that it's good for you too to be doing it, especially if it's the truth. If you're speaking from here, this is, you know, the throat chakra, which is blue, and that's my color, and it's always been, and the throat chakra says, speak your truth. But if you can speak what you think you found to be the truth, well, then you have a right to speak, in my opinion. I think a lot of speech is just, and the transactional analyst would agree with this, a lot of speech has no real direction except to keep people from killing each other. They're just being friendly, having a conversation, but the distance between people is still enormous, even though people need so much cohesiveness with each other, because we are by nature social beings. and even more so than was generally thought. We're not like billiard balls in relationship to one another. We're not. We're much more of a flow at the base. You've heard me use descriptions like, we're bubbles on the ocean. And we're alienated from the other bubbles. We think we're different.
Did the pathology that Daenerys was expressing in these final scenes stem from her separative nature from the world?
I would say, I suppose you could say it that way, or you could say it's coterminous with it, meaning it's side by side. There is the fundamental problem, and nobody can address. I mean, the superficial world doesn't address this. We are at a point now. Okay, let me state this more directly. The problem is separative human ego, which in the East is the devil. We have a devil. We projected the devil outward. He's a being out there, and all this and that. Maybe he is, but it's only because we created him.
He has a new season on Netflix now with Lucifer.
Yeah, I mean, they'll glorify anybody. They'll put Lucifer in the world, and he's a good guy, right? He's kind of a nice guy. You're gonna like Lucifer.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's just amazing. They did this with vampirism. I mean,
Right.
I've addressed the vampire thing. They've turned the vampire into a hero. They're even tribes now.
Right.
Tribes of vampires hanging out together. Anyway. But a bunch of narcissists hanging out together. That's basically what it is. These are arch narcissists, malignant arch narcissists, and they're all hanging out together and looking out for each other. Just like, how possible is that? They could be, because we're up against the others because we don't care about anybody. We are all psychopaths, they could say. We don't care about anybody. I don't care about you either. But we're band together because strength and numbers and all that. We're going to fight against the what? The werewolves, which are guys like you, right? You took me away, John. You got to get me back to where I was.
So we were talking about the Daenerys being separative in nature.
It's just the nature of the beast, and this is my point. We don't address it, and it'll never be addressed. And I can say this until I'm dead. And people will once in a while hear about this and say, I read Alan Watts. Oh, I read D.T. Suzuki. Oh, I read Aldous Huxley's book on perennial philosophy. I read, you know what I mean? I read this guy and I read that. But then you go in your everyday life and you are exactly what you're describing in terms of the problem. You live your life, drive in your car. And the reason that people care about each other, in a sense, is because you don't want to get into accidents.
Right.
So it's self-interest that's motivating most people. And you know that there are people out there that they'll crash you into an abutment and they won't even glance back at you. And many of them I found to be little old ladies out in California. And I love that because they drive so much better in California than we do here. But don't cross the little old lady in California. I love California. So here's the basic problem. The devil is ego in the Eastern philosophies, in the Eastern religions. Everything pours out of the separativeness, and it's a gigantic mistake, and it's incredibly difficult to overcome. And people try to do it in the best way possible. Instead of becoming politicians, they're not inclined to be, instead of going out and trying to gain great fame and fortune and power, they go sit in a Zen monastery, or they go to another Christian monastery and they pray, or they sit in a Zen monastery and they seek the silent mind. They do it in various ways. They do Sufi dancing and they eat vegan and they do everything possible to try to transcend ego. But remember, every single effort is driven by ego. Ego wants to what? The Buddha was perfectly honest. I loved what he did. He said, I want to end suffering. That's what it's all about, with suffering. You can paint it beautifully and say, I care about others, I want to do for others, and all this. I remember a young woman saying in front of me that she wanted to gain as much spiritual power as she could so that she could help people.
Mm.
Ooh, what a formula for monstrosity.
Mm.
I tried to say something about it, and I shouldn't have even bothered. What's the point? Because I'm not going to, she failed anyway. She's not leading the world, thank God. No, some other monster is leading the world. As I said, let's look at the political parties. People take a look at the current administration and they see terrible flaws, true, factual flaws. But that doesn't mean that their tribe, their political tribe, would do any better. And they've proven that they haven't. Administrations go back and forth and going back and forth. And America continues to go to hell in a handbasket.
So, several ideas floating around in my head as we talk about this. Service. There was a thing that Jon Snow had said in this. He said, love is the depth of duty.
Duty, yeah.
Right. And living in service to others, not slavishly living in service to others, but we had brought this up in the last podcast, I think, too, but having some duty and service to mankind in general, like on an individual basis, listening to others and treating others respectfully and things like that. Would that not aid in closing the gap, the distance between people over time? Would that not some sort of complete cellular unification of people, but would that not develop a better sense of being while we exist?
Okay, I'm going to lean on a little lightweight intellectual known as Plato to answer that, if you don't mind. The only way, huh?
Who?
Plato.
Who's that? Yeah.
In a great deal of his writings, he spoke through the voice of Socrates, who never did write, but was a genius beyond anybody. He was like a walking razor blade in his thought process. The only way that the band of administrators and soldiers and policemen and all the other people dedicated to duty could somehow transcend their fundamental condition and therefore not go to war with each other, as most have, okay, is for there to be a higher authority. But his version of the higher authority was not at all like ego-bound beings. He saw them in terms of the philosopher kings, who would be expressions of the highest form of reason. And they would live like monks, basically, even though they ran everything. Kind of like if you understood Iran, the Ayatollah Khomeini, when the revolution took place, the Ayatollah basically gave the orders. But it was like, here's the philosophy of it. Do this. Make it so, number one. Pardon my reference to the old Star Trek. They didn't have to do anything. They were just the thinkers. So,
kind of like Brandon Stark by the end.
Yeah, he would be the closest, because he didn't want the job. He was doing it out of duty. He was doing it out of compassion for people. Yeah, that would be the best kind of person. Of course, they had some excellent points in there. Remember when Sam got up and tried to say that everybody should vote? Like, he's talking about democracy,
right, and then laughed.
And they all exploded in laughter.
Great.
And nobody ever bothered to deal with it again, because that's just, under those circumstances, they were totally unworkable.
Right.
And besides that, what a joke. You don't want the people to choose anybody.
What would they base it on?
Exactly right.
Right. What would they base their opinion on? They don't know them.
But see, it's always going to be it's like you're going to assume that the council is going to be made of wise people.
Right.
Not necessarily, but so they're going to have to basically make some kind of code or constitution among them.
Right.
They're going to have to write up something and make it a formula that they follow. Because if they don't follow a formula, it's going to be all about self-interest again. And it still will be anyway. Because you've got this thing, this demon in the middle of it all. It's called ego. It's human self-interest. Right. And we live these lives, and I'm going to say that this is for the couple of people watching. It's too damn bad. It's lamentable that this is the way we are. Now, you could say, what do you want to become part of the soup? You want to lose your sense of self? Are you crazy? Wouldn't you be crazy? Wouldn't you be crazy? They used to call this kind of thing in India divine madness. There would be probably people with great brain damage, and they would be sitting in the middle of the square throwing dirt all over themselves and be taken care of like perpetual children, suffering from divine madness. They would be perceived as very lucky. They would be very lucky. They didn't have a sense of disconnection. You talk about the individual self-interest, talk about it in its reality. Look at what people do to overcome the disconnection. They seek out great power, they seek out great wealth, they seek out eternal physical pleasures, they seek out all kinds of symbolic evidence of love. They want to become famous and wealthy. Everybody knows me. Who gives a rat's ass that everybody knows you? You're still all alone. When I was teaching existential thoughts in one of my courses, I pointed out that suppose everything came up in a certain way for an individual, like everybody loved you, everybody laughed at every hint of humor, everybody catered to every inclination of yours. Whenever you entered a room, everyone stopped and turned and gave you attention as if you were some kind of high royalty. You live like this, and and people would just fawn all over you. Your grace.
Yeah.
And then one day, you explode at them and tell them, get the hell out, because you feel cheated. What's being cheated? First of all, you've been turned into some kind of an object, and you've got to be that kind of thing. And secondly, they don't know you. You're unknown. You're every bit as separate and lonely as you ever were. I mean, if people attack you, you'd feel lonely, right? There's that ontological loneliness I talk about. You're thrown back upon yourself. Some people will fight, some people will draw, some people will scream and cry and collapse, but it will produce some kind of internal psychological reaction. Well, the same thing would be the object of adulation.
Right.
You're unknown. I'm not this. Don't do this to me. I'm supposed to go to a reunion of one of my classes I taught many, many years ago, 50th year reunion. I started teaching 57 years ago? Anyway.
1,500 years ago.
Perhaps this has been going on a long time. And failing. But anyway, and some of them will say some nice, don't do that. Just don't do that to me. I am this now. That was then. That was, if I still identify with that, I'm a fool. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of ways to be a fool. I can be a fool some other way. But I'd be that kind of a fool. To think that I am what they remember, think about that. And then the ones who dislike me too, I'm going to apologize to them for damaging their lives, having them in my class. And no doubt I've misled them about something. How could I not? But most of them are so lost they don't even realize that I contributed to being that way.
So, in closing, give us some thoughts on your experience with Game of Thrones. What do you think? Was it worthwhile? Would you have done it differently? Do you think the right calls were made? I think Arya's my favorite, honestly.
Well, apparently they made her a favorite. She grew up from a little girl into this
Yeah.
killing machine who's got nobility built into her.
Yeah. I think they should do a whole series of Arya going off into the unknown land.
Little Maisie. We could call this Game of Thrones and Self-Deceit. Okay?